Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turn now to a strange, interesting little poem, number 403. The winters are so short. One scholar has called this one of Emily's strangest and most arresting poems, where nature itself speaks. We will qualify Emily sometimes as a romantic, given this poem or poems like it. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments as well as the preceding 402 poems. We just finished with 402, I Pay in Satin Cash. Now, here you have nature seeming to complain in some ways, almost like a housewife who has to do her duties. And then we get to the end of the poem, and there's this strange twist of skepticism, as Emily will maybe speak skeptically about Noah and the flood. The winters are so short, I'm hardly justified in sending all the birds away and moving into pod. Myself are scarcely settled, the phobies have begun, and then it's time to strike my tent and open house again. It's mostly interruptions. My summer is despoiled because there was a winter once, and all the cattle starved, and so there was a deluge and swept the world away, and Ararat's a legend now, and no one credits Noah. Now, it is amazing that, of course, the deluge, the flood of Noah, and Genesis 7 and 8 is mentioned here, referenced here, and yet notice the speaker of the poem is nature, speaking about winters. Now, of course, what's the irony of all ironies that winters are so short? Well, really, of course, we usually think of winters as being long, right? The winters are so short. Notice the use of the word so twice in this poem. So short, and so there was a deluge. I'm hardly justified. I cannot help but read that line and think of our study of Plato's Republic 10, 617. The responsibility is with the chooser. God is justified. You'll remember in our study at LearnStrong.net of Plato's Republic. The winters are so short, I'm hardly justified in sending all the birds away and moving into pod. In other words, the cyclical power of nature. And I think in the end, this is why she goes to Noah. And the idea theologically that there is always this cyclical kind of reverence that's happening. Notice she'll say myself, nature personified now as human. For scarcely settled, here are the S sibilant sounds, the phobies have begun. When we get to poem 1690, at the very end of our study, it'll read like this. The ones that disappeared are back, the phobie and the crow, precisely as in March is heard the curtness of the jay. And this an autumn or a spring, my wisdom loses way. One side of me the nuts are ripe, the other side is May. The phobies here have begun, and then it's time to strike my tent. It's interesting that tent is referenced because, of course, in the Noah story, especially the famous story about Noah naked in the tent, it comes to mind. Strike my tent and open house again. In other words, it seems as if nature is saying, just at the moment when everything has been shut up, then all of a sudden spring is back and I got to open the house again. It's mostly, and here it is, interruptions, and I think that's the key word here. My summer is despoiled, just like we're going to get to the idea of Noah and the flood, because there was a winter once. Now this once, some scholars have read about, have read almost like once upon a time, and all the cattle starved. Notice the repetition of and so there was a deluge and swept the world away. In other words, the tone here is almost like, this is the nature of nature. In other words, we go through these phases, we go through these cycles. And then she'll say it, but Ararat's a legend, going to Genesis 8:4, and the idea that the ark landed on Mount Ararat. Notice legend capitalized now, and no one credits Noah. Now, it's interesting in line in letter 650 that Emily, writing to Mrs. Holland, said, quote, I don't know what she, mother, would think if she knew that Austin told me confidentially there was no such person as Elijah. And we will see in poem 597 that Emily seems to suggest that maybe there wasn't a Moses either. No one credits Noah here, meaning what? Everyone is now skeptical of these stories. What exactly is going on in this little poem? I think Emily is pointing out the cyclical nature of nature. And yet, we have a tendency to see these interruptions through stories that we tell, and these stories sometimes are accepted and sometimes no longer believed. And to be the language of the modern skeptic is at play here. I love the power of so in this poem. And at 3a, well, we already commented on a number of different titles that come to mind. Poem 337 immediately comes back to mind as well. Think about Plato and Republic. And that Republic 10 is in fact what? A critique of the very notion of the arts and whether the artists should be believed or not. This skepticism, I think, is part of it. Finally, at 3b, how do you feel about the cycles of nature? And how are you reading a poem like this in regards to Emily's skepticism? Thank you.